Hello, Midnight Wanderers, and welcome to Dreadvein. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. Where I am from, stories about witch doctors and spiritual experiences are not unusual. People in my area grow up hearing about them, and many people believe they are a normal part of life. I had always heard stories about things like that, but I never thought I would personally experience something that would stay in my memory for so many years. This happened when I was still in school. At the time, I was just a normal student going through my everyday routine. I wasn't someone who was constantly thinking about spirits or supernatural things. I had heard people talk about them, but I never expected to see anything that would make me question what I believed. There was a girl at my school who was in a different year than me. I didn't really know her, and we had never talked before. She was just another student I would sometimes see around the school. I had no idea that people believed she was being called to become a witch doctor. I didn't know anything about her situation back then. I didn't know what her family believed, what she was going through, or that anyone thought she had some kind of spiritual connection. To me, she was simply another student. One day, I was leaving a classroom and walking into the corridor. It was just a normal school day. I was probably thinking about normal things that students think about, like classes, homework, or where I needed to go next. But as soon as I stepped into the corridor, I noticed something was wrong. The girl was standing against a wall, and she looked absolutely terrified. At first, I thought maybe she was upset or something had happened to her. She wasn't acting like someone who was just having a bad day. She looked genuinely afraid, like she had seen something that had completely frightened her. I remember stopping, because her expression caught my attention. Then I noticed one of the school cleaners nearby. He was not close to us. He was some distance away, just doing his job like any other day. He was sweeping the floor and moving a bin around while cleaning the corridor. Nothing about him looked unusual. He looked like a normal person going about his work. The girl was staring in that direction, and I didn't understand why. I looked toward the cleaner because I wanted to see what had scared her. That was when everything changed. She told me that she could see a spirit attached to him. I remember being confused at first. I didn't know what she meant. I looked at her, then back toward the cleaner, trying to understand what she was talking about. And then, somehow, I saw it too. Even now, I find it difficult to explain exactly what happened. It was not like seeing something clearly in the normal way. It was more like my attention shifted, and suddenly I became aware of something that I had never noticed before. What I saw scared me more than anything I had ever experienced. It looked like something terrifying, something that my mind immediately connected with a demon. The appearance was frightening, and the feeling that came with seeing it was even worse. It was like looking at something that did not belong in the normal world around us. The hallway that had felt completely normal a moment earlier suddenly felt different. I could still see the cleaner. I could still see the school around me, but at the same time, it felt like there was something else there that I could not explain. The fear hit me immediately. What made it even stranger was that the girl seemed to be experiencing the same thing. She was scared, and I was scared. We were both looking at something that the cleaner himself seemed completely unaware of. He just continued cleaning. He had no idea that two students were standing there frightened while watching him. That part has always stayed with me. The fact that he looked completely normal and calm while we were seeing something that terrified us was one of the strangest parts of the whole experience. For those few moments, it felt like we were seeing something hidden from everyone else. Then, a teacher came into the corridor. She noticed us and asked what was happening. She wanted to know why we were standing there and why we looked so scared. The moment she spoke to us, it felt like we suddenly snapped out of whatever was happening. It was almost like waking up from a strange state. The fear started to fade. The strange feeling disappeared. The corridor looked normal again. The cleaner was just the cleaner. He was still there, still doing his work, and nothing about him seemed unusual anymore. He looked exactly like he always had. The girl and I were left standing there trying to understand what had just happened. I remember feeling confused because I couldn't explain how something that felt so real could disappear so quickly. The teacher didn't seem surprised that something was wrong. She asked questions and tried to understand what happened. I didn't know much about the girl, so I explained what I had experienced. Afterward, I spoke with the teacher privately and told her everything. I told her about seeing the spirit and how scared I felt. I told her that I had no idea what was happening, especially because I didn't even know the girl. That was when she explained something to me. She told me about the girl and how people believed she was being called to become a witch doctor. Before that moment, I had no idea. Learning that made the experience even stranger to me. It made me wonder if there was something about her that I didn't understand. Maybe she was seeing something because of her beliefs, her experiences, or something else entirely. I never really found an answer. I also never experienced anything like that again. That is one of the reasons why the memory stayed with me. It wasn't something that happened repeatedly. It was one single moment in my life that felt completely different from anything else. Years later, I still think about that corridor. I still remember the look on the girl's face before anything happened. I still remember how she looked like she was terrified of something that nobody else could see. I remember the cleaner just moving around normally, completely unaware. And I remember the moment everything went back to normal after the teacher spoke to us. There are many ways people might explain an experience like this. Some people might say it was imagination. Some might say fear and suggestion played a role. Others might believe it was a spiritual experience. I don't know what the truth is. I only know what happened from my perspective. I was a student walking through a school corridor. I saw someone frightened. I looked where she was looking. She said she saw something attached to the cleaner. Then I experienced something that scared me deeply. Whether there was a spiritual reason behind it, or whether there was another explanation, it was one of the most unforgettable moments of my life. The strangest part is that I didn't even know the girl. I wasn't expecting anything. I wasn't looking for something strange to happen. It was just an ordinary day that suddenly became something I still remember. I have never experienced anything similar since then. But that one moment has always stayed in my mind. I have experienced 3 separate episodes of sleep paralysis in my life, and each one has been unlike anything else I have ever felt. It is difficult to explain the feeling accurately because the fear is not like normal fear. It is not the same as being scared by a movie, a nightmare, or something unexpected happening. It feels much deeper than that. It feels like a completely instinctive reaction, like every part of your body and mind is telling you that something is terribly wrong. I have tried explaining it to people before, but it is one of those experiences that is almost impossible to describe unless someone has personally gone through it. When I tell people about it, some understand the idea of sleep paralysis, but they usually do not understand how real it feels in the moment. They might think it is just a strange dream or a bad nightmare, but it does not feel that way when you are actually experiencing it. The reason it is so terrifying is because you are not completely asleep. During sleep paralysis, your brain wakes up, but your body is still in the state of sleep where it naturally prevents you from moving. Normally, this happens while you are dreaming, so you do not act out your dreams. But sometimes, your mind becomes aware before your body is fully woken up. You are conscious, but you cannot move. You can see your surroundings. You can hear things around you. You can feel your body. You know where you are. You are aware that you are lying in your own bed, in your own room. But something is completely wrong because you cannot control your movements. That alone is frightening enough. But for me, the most terrifying part was what my mind created during those moments. In each of the three experiences, I felt like there was something in the room with me. My brain created the image of a dark, demonic-looking figure near my bed. It was not like a normal dream where things feel blurry or unrealistic. It felt completely real. It felt like I was awake and seeing something that was actually there. That is the part that still stays with me. I could feel my body lying in bed. I could hear the sound of the fan. I could hear my husband nearby. I could hear myself breathing. Everything around me felt normal and real. At the same time, I could see this terrifying figure. My mind was somehow mixing reality with a dreamlike experience. And because I was awake enough to recognize my surroundings, it made the whole thing feel even more convincing. The first time it happened, I remember the confusion before the fear fully took over. At first, I did not understand why I could not move. I was trying to wake myself up properly, trying to make my body respond, but nothing happened. I tried to move my arms. Nothing. I tried to move my legs. Nothing. I tried to speak. Nothing. I was aware that I needed to do something, but my body would not listen. That feeling alone created panic. Then I became aware of the figure. It was standing near me, and the way my brain interpreted it made it seem threatening. It was as if something was there watching me. The fear that came over me was immediate and overwhelming. I knew somewhere in my mind that I was in my bedroom, but my instincts reacted as if I was in danger. It is strange, because even though I understood what was happening afterward, during the episode it did not feel like my brain was creating something. It felt like I was witnessing something. That is what makes sleep paralysis so difficult to explain. People often say things like, "You were just dreaming," but when you are in that state, it does not feel like a dream. You can hear real sounds. You can recognize your room. You can remember details afterward. The second time it happened, it was just as terrifying. Again, I was aware of my surroundings. I could hear the fan running. I could hear my husband. I could hear my own breathing. I knew exactly where I was. But I could not move. The same kind of frightening figure appeared, and the fear was just as intense. My mind created the feeling that it was close to me, like it was pressing down on my chest. That feeling of pressure made everything worse. I have heard other people describe similar experiences, and many mention feeling like something is sitting on them or holding them down. At the time, I did not know that was a common part of sleep paralysis. I only knew what I was experiencing, and it felt completely real. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call for help. My husband was right there, and I knew that if I could just make a sound or move, he could wake me up and everything would stop. But I could not. The most frustrating part was that I was not unconscious. I was aware. I knew I needed help. I knew there was a simple solution if I could just communicate. But my body would not respond. I remember the panic of trying to force myself to make a sound. I could hear my breathing become more desperate. I was trying so hard to wake him up, but I could not properly speak. It felt like being trapped inside myself. Eventually, after what felt like forever, my body started to come back under my control. It was like something suddenly switched back on. I was able to move again, and the moment I could move, the experience ended. The room was normal. The fan was still there. My husband was still there. Everything was exactly how it should have been, but the fear remained. The third experience was the one that stayed with me the most. It happened in the same kind of way. I became aware while still unable to move. I could see my bedroom. I could hear the normal sounds around me. I knew I was awake, but I was stuck. Again, the figure appeared. This time, the experience felt even more intense. My brain created the feeling that it was pulling me downward from the foot of the bed. The sensation felt so real that I remember being completely convinced something was happening to me. I could not move to fight it. I could not call out. I could only experience it. That is what makes sleep paralysis so frightening. Your mind can create a situation where you feel helpless, but you are still aware enough to understand what is happening around you. The episodes usually only lasted around a couple of minutes, but during them, time felt completely different. When you are trapped and afraid, even a short amount of time can feel much longer. Every second felt stretched out. I was waiting for my body to respond. I was waiting to be able to move. I was waiting for the fear to stop. Then, suddenly, it would end. I would snap out of it and regain control of my body. The strange thing is that after it ends, you are left trying to process what just happened. You know you are safe. You know you are in your room. You know the person next to you is real and everything is normal. But the memory of the fear stays. It is difficult because people who have never experienced sleep paralysis often compare it to a nightmare. But it feels different from a normal nightmare because you are awake enough to know where you are. You are not lost in a dream world. You are in your own room. You recognize everything. And that is exactly why it feels so real. The brain is powerful, and during sleep paralysis, it can create experiences that are incredibly convincing. It can combine your surroundings with dream-like images, creating something that feels like it is actually happening. Knowing that does not make the experience any less terrifying while it is happening. A person can understand the science behind something and still be scared by it. That is how I feel about these experiences. I know there are explanations for sleep paralysis. I know the brain can do strange things when waking up from sleep. I know many people experience similar things. But when you are lying there, unable to move, seeing something frightening and feeling trapped, logic does not always help in the moment. Your instincts take over. The fear feels completely real. Out of everything I have experienced in my life, those moments created the strongest fear I have ever felt. Nothing else compares to that feeling of being awake, but unable to control your own body. I hope I never experience it again, but if I do, I know now what is happening. I know that it will eventually pass. I know that my body is still waking up, and that my brain is creating something terrifying because of that strange state between sleep and being awake. Still, knowing the reason does not change the fact that those moments are some of the most frightening memories I have. It is hard to explain something that feels impossible. It is hard to convince someone how real it feels when they have never experienced it themselves. But for me, those 3 episodes were real experiences that I will never forget. I was in 5th grade when this happened, and even though many years have passed since then, it is still one of the strangest and scariest memories I have from my childhood. It was one of those normal nights that you don't expect to remember forever. My best friend was staying over, and we were in the living room building a blanket fort together. We were just being kids, having fun, making a little place for ourselves out of blankets and furniture. At that age, things like that were exciting. We weren't thinking about anything scary or unusual. We were just enjoying the night. Eventually, we started getting tired and decided to sleep inside the blanket fort. The house was quiet, and everything felt completely normal. While we were lying there trying to fall asleep, I suddenly had the idea to mess with my friend. I thought it would be funny to pretend that someone was outside the house, so I started knocking on some of the furniture near us. I told my friend that someone was at the door. I was trying to scare him, and at first, it worked. He reacted like he was unsure what was happening, and I thought it was hilarious. It was just a silly childhood prank, nothing serious. We were both laughing and trying to convince each other that something strange was happening. Of course, my friend didn't want to lose. After a little while, he decided to get me back. He started doing the same thing. He began knocking and acting like someone was at the door. Suddenly, I was the one who was supposed to be scared. We kept going back and forth, trying to scare each other, both of us pretending that we believed the noises were real. Eventually, we got tired of it. We laughed about it and agreed that enough was enough. It wasn't funny anymore, and we needed to go to sleep. So we settled down and tried to get comfortable. The house became quiet again. For a while, everything was normal. Then, right around the crack of dawn, something woke us up. It was knocking. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was still half asleep, and because we had spent so much time earlier pretending someone was knocking, my first thought was that my friend was trying to continue the joke. I remember thinking something like, "Okay, stop. It's not funny anymore." But then I realized something. It wasn't him, and he realized the same thing. We both looked at each other because we knew neither one of us was making the sound. The knocking continued. At first it was just a regular knock. Then it got louder and louder. The sound was no longer something we could ignore. It wasn't coming from inside the living room, and it wasn't part of our game anymore. It was coming from the front door. That realization completely changed the mood. A few hours earlier, we were joking around and trying to scare each other. Now we were both sitting there silently, listening to a real sound coming from the entrance of the house. Neither of us wanted to admit we were scared, but we were. We decided that we had to go check. The thing that made it even stranger was the timing. That morning, it was snowing, and there were already several inches of snow covering the ground outside. Everything was quiet and covered in white. The snow made the entire area look different from normal. My parents' house sat on about 3 acres of land, so it wasn't like we were in a neighborhood where people were constantly walking by. The house was surrounded by space, and from the back of the house to the woods was around 75 yards. There was plenty of open land around us. So if someone had been outside, it would have been strange. We slowly made our way to the front door. The knocking had stopped by the time we got there. That almost made it worse. We stood there wondering if someone was actually outside, or if we had somehow imagined the whole thing. Finally, we opened the door. Nobody was there. The front porch was completely empty. There was no person standing there. No one running away. No one walking down the road. Nothing. At first, we felt confused more than anything. We were expecting some kind of explanation. Maybe someone had played a prank. Maybe someone had knocked and left quickly. But then we noticed the snow. There were footprints. Not normal footprints either. They were big. The tracks looked almost like they came from someone wearing oversized shoes, almost like clown shoes. They were much larger than what we expected to see. Seeing those footprints completely changed how we felt. We were just kids, and we were standing there looking at something that didn't make sense. Someone had been at the door. That much seemed obvious. The footprints started near the front door, but instead of leading away toward the road or another house, they went around the side of the house. That made us even more nervous. Whoever had been there hadn't just knocked and left. They had walked around the house. My friend and I looked at each other, and despite being scared, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to follow the tracks. Looking back, I don't know why we did that. We were children, and we probably should have just gone back inside and told an adult. But at the time, we wanted to know where the footprints went. The tracks continued around the house. We followed them through the snow, watching every step. The world was completely quiet. The snow covered everything, and there were no sounds except our own movement. The footprints eventually led away from the house and toward the woods. The closer we got, the stranger it felt. When we reached the edge of the woods, we noticed something else. There were strange lines in the snow. They looked like marks that could have been made by something like a bicycle tire, but there was no bicycle around. The lines didn't make sense with the footprints. We just stood there, looking at everything. There were the large footprints. There were the strange tracks in the snow. And there was the fact that whoever or whatever made them had gone all the way from our front door to the woods. By that point, we were terrified. The excitement and curiosity disappeared. We weren't trying to solve a mystery anymore. We just wanted to get back inside. We turned around and started running toward the house. And that was when the strangest part happened. As we ran back, we looked at the snow behind us. Everything was gone. Not covered up. Not faded. Gone. The footprints we had made while walking were gone. The large, strange footprints were gone. The lines in the snow were gone. The entire area looked untouched. The snow was smooth and perfect, like nobody had walked there at all. It looked exactly like it had before we opened the door that morning. We stopped and stared. Neither of us knew what to say. A few seconds earlier, we had been standing there looking at clear tracks in the snow. We had followed them. We had walked through the same area. But now there was nothing. No evidence, no explanation, just fresh snow. That moment scared us more than the knocking itself. The knocking could have been explained somehow. Maybe someone had been there. Maybe there was a simple reason, but the tracks disappearing made no sense. We ran back into the house as fast as we could. I don't remember exactly what we said when we got inside. I just remember how scared we were. We had gone from laughing and joking around in a blanket fort to being completely convinced that something strange had happened. Even now, when I think about that morning, I still remember the details. The sound of the knocking. The front door opening to an empty porch. The footprints that looked like they came from huge shoes. Following them through the snow. Seeing the strange lines near the woods. And then watching everything disappear. I know there could be explanations. Maybe the snow changed somehow. Maybe we misunderstood what we saw. Maybe there was something about the weather or the conditions that affected the tracks. But I have never forgotten how real it felt. It was one of those moments where you know exactly what you experienced, even if you don't understand it. Out of all the strange things that have happened in my life, that morning remains the scariest. I was just a kid having a sleepover with my best friend, joking around in a blanket fort. Then, by the time the sun came up, we were standing outside looking at something we still cannot explain. It was, without a doubt, the most terrifying day of my life. A few years ago, around the fall of 2024, I experienced something with a few of my friends that I still think about. Even now, I have no clear explanation for what happened that night. And the more I think about it, the stranger it feels. It started out as a normal evening. Me and 3 of my friends decided to go for a walk along a bike path. It was getting late, and the sun was starting to go down. The area was becoming darker, but it was still a place we were familiar with. We had walked there before, So, at first there was nothing that made us feel nervous. There were only 4 of us on the path. No other people were around. The bike path was usually a place where people walked, ran, or rode bikes. But that evening it was unusually quiet. There were no strangers passing by, no groups of people, and no one else nearby that we could see. At first, we didn't think much of it. We were just talking and enjoying the walk. Then we reached an area where the path was surrounded by trees. The trees were thicker there, making the area feel more isolated. The light was fading, and the shadows were starting to cover parts of the path. That was when we heard something strange. At first, none of us could figure out what it was. It sounded like a woman. More specifically, it sounded like a woman crying and singing at the same time. The sound was difficult to describe because it didn't sound like normal crying or normal singing. It was somewhere in between. It had this strange emotional sound to it, like someone was upset but also repeating a melody. The strangest part was that it sounded like the same small section kept repeating. It wasn't a full song. It wasn't a normal conversation. It was like the same 5 to 10 seconds of sound was playing over and over again. We all noticed it. At first, we looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Since we were near houses, we thought maybe someone nearby was playing something through a speaker. Maybe someone was listening to music, watching something, or had some kind of outdoor sound system. That explanation made sense. It was weird, but it was possible. So we decided not to worry about it. We joked about it a little and kept walking. But the sound continued. And then we noticed something else. It seemed like it was following us. At first, we thought maybe we were just walking closer to wherever the sound was coming from. But as we kept moving, the sound stayed with us. It didn't fade away like you would expect if it was coming from one fixed location. It almost felt like it was moving with us. Every few seconds, we would hear the same crying and singing sound repeating. We would walk. It would continue. We would stop. It would still be there. That started making all of us feel uncomfortable. Even though we were trying to come up with normal explanations, something about it felt wrong. Still, we tried to ignore it. The biggest reason was because we knew the park technically closed at dusk. The bike path was considered part of a park area, and we weren't supposed to be there after dark. So instead of stopping and investigating, we decided the best thing to do was just get home. We didn't want to get caught being there late. And honestly, none of us wanted to stand around in the dark trying to find the source of a strange sound. So we kept going. Eventually, we got closer to a bridge that we had to cross. Everything seemed normal for a moment, but before we reached the bridge, something happened that I still struggle to explain. Me and one other friend suddenly felt strange. I don't remember the exact moment it started. It wasn't like I suddenly fell asleep or lost all awareness. It was more like my mind became disconnected from what was happening around me. It felt almost like being pulled into a trance. My memory of that part is incomplete. I remember walking, but I don't remember making a decision to do what happened next. Later, my other 2 friends explained what they saw. They said that me and the other friend who experienced this started walking toward the tree line. We weren't walking toward the bridge anymore. We were moving toward the trees. The weirdest part was that we were completely ignoring them. They said they tried talking to us, but we didn't respond. It was like we couldn't hear them. They were watching the 2 of us move away from the path, and they didn't understand what was happening. Meanwhile, from my perspective, I wasn't aware of any of that. I wasn't thinking I should walk toward the trees. I wasn't making some kind of choice. It was almost like I was on autopilot. The only thing that broke me out of it was my friends yelling our full names, not just calling out casually. They were shouting. They were trying to get our attention. When they yelled our names, it was like something suddenly snapped. I became aware again. I looked around and realized I wasn't where I thought I was. I was away from where I should have been, and my friends were trying to get me to come back. The other friend who had been in that same state also snapped out of it. Neither of us really understood what had happened. The confusion was mixed with fear because we had no memory of deciding to move toward the trees. We immediately ran to catch up with our other two friends. By that point, nobody was joking anymore. Whatever we thought the sound was before didn't matter. We just wanted to get across the bridge and leave. Our two friends were already waiting there. They had stayed near the bridge while trying to get our attention, and they looked just as shaken as we felt. We quickly crossed the bridge, but then something happened that made all of us even more scared. The sound crossed with us. That strange crying and singing noise that we had been hearing on the path seemed to move past the bridge too. It didn't stop on the other side. It didn't stay behind us. It continued following us. That was the moment when we stopped trying to explain it. We were done assuming it was just a speaker or something from a nearby house. Because if it was a speaker, how was it moving with us? How did it seem to continue wherever we went? And why had two of us suddenly felt like we weren't fully in control of ourselves? The fear finally took over. We started running. Nobody wanted to stay there any longer. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran home as quickly as we could. When we finally got back, we were all trying to process what had happened. We talked about it, compared what each person remembered, and tried to figure out if there was some normal explanation. Maybe there was someone nearby. Maybe there was a hidden speaker. Maybe there was something about the environment that made the sound seem like it was moving. Maybe the whole trance-like feeling had another explanation. We considered everything we could think of, but we still couldn't make sense of it. The strangest part to me is that all four of us experienced different parts of the same event. The two friends who stayed on the path saw me and the other friend acting strangely. The two of us who entered that strange state felt something completely different. And all of us heard that same sound following us. If it had only been one person, it would be easier to dismiss. But there were four of us. We all walked the same path. We all heard the same thing. And two of us had the same strange experience at the same time. I have never experienced anything like that before or since. Whenever I think back to that night, I remember how normal it started. It was just a walk with friends. There was nothing unusual about it at first. Then, the darkness came, the trees surrounded us, and that strange sound appeared. A sound that seemed impossible to place, a sound that seemed to follow us, and an experience that none of us have ever been able to fully explain. Even now, I still don't know what happened that night. I used to manage a bar that had an apartment located above it. The building itself was old, and it carried a lot of history. Before it became a bar, the apartment upstairs had apparently been used as a brothel that was shut down back in the 1960s. Because of that, there were always stories and rumors connected to the place. People who knew the history of the building would talk about what had happened there years before. But I never really paid much attention to those stories. I was never someone who automatically believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I had heard plenty of stories from people over the years, but I always tried to look for normal explanations first. Old buildings make strange sounds, pipes make noise, floors creak, doors move. There are a lot of things that can make a place feel creepy, especially at night when you are alone. But working there, especially late at night, started to make me notice things. The bar had a front door and a back entrance. After closing time, both were locked, and the building was usually completely empty except for me. My routine was always the same. At the end of the night, after all the customers left and everything was cleaned up, I would sit down, count my drawer, handle paperwork, and finish payroll. The spot where I always sat faced the front door. That detail matters, because it meant I could see the entrance clearly. I wasn't sitting somewhere hidden or with my back turned to the room. I had a direct view of the front area, and I knew when someone came in. At least, I thought I did. Over time, I started noticing something strange. Many nights while I was sitting there counting money, I would hear what sounded exactly like someone coming through the back door. It was a very specific sound, the sound of the door opening. The movement of someone entering, the little noises that come with a person walking into a building. Every time it happened, I would immediately turn around. And every time, there was nothing there. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself that maybe the building was old and settling. Maybe I was hearing something from upstairs. Maybe the sounds were coming from somewhere else, and my brain was just connecting them to the back door. That made sense. I wanted it to make sense. Because the alternative was much harder to accept. The strange thing was how often it happened. It wasn't just once. It happened enough times that I started expecting it. I would be sitting there doing my work, hear the back entrance sound, turn around, and find an empty room. The bar would be completely still. No one there, no movement. Nothing, even though it was unsettling. I kept working there. I had a job to do, and eventually I became used to the feeling. But then one night was different. It started like any other closing shift. The bar was empty. The customers were gone. Everything had been cleaned up. I was sitting down as usual, counting my drawer and working on payroll. The building was quiet. Too quiet. For some reason, I suddenly had this horrible feeling that I shouldn't be there. It wasn't just a normal feeling of being alone at night. It was much stronger than that. It felt like I was doing something wrong, like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, like I was being watched. I remember feeling uncomfortable sitting there, even though I was doing something completely normal. I wasn't breaking any rules. I wasn't doing anything strange. I was simply closing the business like I had done many times before. But something about that moment felt different. I felt like I was not alone. Then I heard it. The back door. That same familiar sound I had heard so many times before, the sound of the entrance opening. Except this time, there was one major problem. The door should have been locked. I knew that. I was the one who closed everything. I was the one who checked the building. So when I heard it, my first thought was confusion. Maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I forgot to lock it. I immediately turned around. And that was when I saw him. There was a man standing in the back doorway. He was extremely tall. He was wearing a suit. He was leaning against the doorframe like he belonged there. The first thing that went through my mind was not ghost or anything like that. My first thought was completely normal. I thought I must have accidentally left the door open. I thought, oh no, someone got inside. And then I realized something else. I was between him and the exit. That was the part that made me nervous. I didn't know who he was or why he was there. He was just standing there silently, looking like he had walked into the bar like he owned the place. But I still reacted calmly. I didn't want to make the situation worse. So I said something simple. I told him that we were closed and that I couldn't have anyone there at that time. I was trying to sound professional, like I was dealing with a customer who didn't realize the business was closed. I remember turning my attention away for only a moment. I looked toward my phone to make sure I knew where it was. It was literally just a second. I wanted to make sure I had it nearby. Then I looked back, and he was gone, not walking away, not leaving. Gone. The doorway was empty. The room was empty. There was nobody there. I froze. My mind immediately tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe he walked away quickly. Maybe I somehow missed him moving. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. But none of those explanations made sense. The bar was not large. The doorway was right there. There was nowhere for someone to disappear without me seeing. And the biggest thing was that I knew how real he looked. That is the part that still bothers me. He didn't look like a shadow. He didn't look like a blurry shape. He looked like an actual person standing there. The way he was dressed, the way he stood, the way he looked. Everything about him seemed normal, except that he disappeared. After it happened, I remember shaking badly. I didn't want to believe what I had just experienced. Even I questioned myself. I thought maybe my eyes played a trick on me. Maybe my brain filled in details because I was tired. Maybe being alone late at night affected how I interpreted what I saw. But I was still disturbed enough that I decided to check the security cameras. I wanted proof that something happened. Or honestly, I wanted proof that I was wrong. When I watched the footage back, it only made things stranger. The camera showed me sitting there. Then it showed me turning around. It showed me talking toward the doorway. But there was no clear person there. Nothing obvious. The only strange thing was that the area seemed slightly fuzzy or distorted for a moment. It wasn't enough to prove anything. It wasn't a clear image of someone standing there. It was just me appearing to talk to empty space. That was honestly one of the creepiest parts, because I knew what I saw. But the camera didn't show what I expected. After that night, I told some people about it. Almost nobody believed me. And honestly, I understand why. If someone told me that story, I would probably question it too. It sounds impossible. It sounds like something from a movie. A person appearing in a locked building and disappearing seconds later? It sounds crazy. But I was there. I experienced it. For a long time, I didn't even fully believe myself. I kept trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was my imagination. I kept going back and forth. Then something happened that completely changed the way I looked at it. Years later, after I had retired from managing the bar, the previous owners of the building posted an old picture they had found. It was a throwback photo from the late 1950s. The picture showed the bar from back when it was connected to the brothel history, and in that photo was the manager from that time period. The moment I saw him, I felt my stomach drop. It was him. The same man. The same face. The same overall appearance. Even the expression on his face looked familiar. He had that same serious, almost angry look that I remembered. I couldn't believe it. I stared at that picture for a long time because it felt impossible. I had never seen that photo before. I had never known what he looked like, and yet the person in the picture matched what I had seen that night. That was the moment when I stopped being able to easily dismiss the experience. I still don't know what happened. I don't know if there is a logical explanation that I haven't found. I don't know if it was something connected to the history of the building. But after seeing that picture, I started thinking differently about the whole situation. I even developed my own theory about it. The building used to be a place where the manager was in control. From what I learned about the history, he was someone who ran things and expected the business to continue. I started wondering if maybe, in his mind, the place was still his. Maybe as long as everything was running, he had no reason to appear. But when I sat down at night, after everyone was gone, maybe it bothered him. Maybe he was angry that things were not happening the way they used to. Maybe he was showing up because he wanted to make sure everything was being handled. It sounds strange when I say it out loud, I know that. But after everything that happened, it was the only explanation that made sense to me. After that, I actually started talking to him. Not in a dramatic way. I would just sit down at closing and say what I was doing. I would explain that I was counting the drawer, finishing paperwork, and cleaning everything. Basically, I treated it like I was letting him know the place was being taken care of. The strange noises seemed to happen less after that. I don't know if that was because of anything I did, or if it was just coincidence. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe acknowledging it helped me feel less uncomfortable. Or maybe, somehow, we reached some kind of understanding. I still can't explain what happened that night. I only know that the man I saw looked completely real. He didn't look like a dream. He didn't look like a shadow. He looked like someone standing in the doorway of my bar. And after seeing that old photograph years later, I have never been able to completely forget it. Some places carry their history with them. Maybe that building was one of those places, and maybe, for one moment, I saw a small piece of that history come back. I grew up in a house deep in the countryside that had a very unusual history. Before it became a home, the building had apparently been a hospital. By the time I moved there, it was already extremely old. The kind of old house where every sound feels louder at night, where the walls and floors seem to have their own personality. I moved there when I was 12 years old, so I was still a kid trying to adjust to a completely new place. The house was surrounded by countryside, far away from busy roads and neighbors. During the day, it could actually be a beautiful and peaceful place. There was plenty of space, fresh air, and quiet. But at night, it felt completely different. The silence was one of the strangest parts. When you live somewhere with a lot of people around, you get used to background noises, cars passing, people talking, neighbors moving around. But in the countryside, especially in an old house, every little sound stands out. At night, I would often hear the wooden floors cracking. At first, I told myself it was normal. Old houses move. Wood expands and contracts depending on the temperature. Pipes make noises. Buildings settle. There were plenty of logical explanations. But sometimes the sounds didn't feel random. It would sound like someone was walking around. A floorboard would crack in one room, then another, almost like movement through the house. And because I knew the history of the place, it was hard not to think about it. I also started noticing strange things with our pets. We had a dog, and she would sometimes act completely different at night. During the day, she was normal. She was playful and acted like any other dog. But at night, there were moments when she would suddenly become afraid. She would hide her head in our arms. She would shake. And she would stare up at the ceiling like she was looking at something we couldn't see. The first few times it happened, I assumed she was just scared of a noise or something outside. Animals hear things humans don't. That was the obvious explanation. But the way she reacted was different. It wasn't like she heard something and was curious. She looked frightened, like she wanted protection. Our cat was strange in a different way. Cats already have a habit of staring at things that humans don't notice, so sometimes I tried not to think about it. But there were times when she would sit completely still and stare at one specific corner near the top of the ceiling, not moving, not playing, just watching. It would go on for long periods of time. There would be nothing there that I could see. No insect, no shadow, nothing obvious. Still, she would keep looking at that same spot. All of these things together slowly made the house feel different. Not necessarily evil, just like there was something about the place that I didn't understand. During my teenage years, I got used to it in a way. When you live somewhere long enough, even strange things can become normal. There were many nights when I felt like something was around. Sometimes I would feel a presence. It's hard to explain that feeling. It's not like seeing someone. It's more like when you close your eyes and you can tell someone is standing nearby. You don't need to look because you can sense that someone is there. That was the feeling. In the past, whenever I felt that way, I would usually ignore it. Sometimes I would even say goodbye out loud, almost like I was acknowledging it and telling it to leave me alone. I never really thought too much about it. But one night was different. I couldn't sleep. I was lying awake and eventually decided to get up and go into the office. There was a computer in there, and I thought I could distract myself by playing a game. So I sat down and started playing solitaire. Everything was normal at first. The room was quiet. The computer screen was glowing. I was focused on the game. Then suddenly, I felt it. That same feeling of a presence. Like I wasn't alone anymore. I stopped playing for a moment. The feeling was strong enough that I couldn't ignore it. I remember sitting there thinking about all the other times I had felt something and brushed it off. But for some reason, that night I decided to do something different. Instead of ignoring it, I spoke. I said out loud, "If you're there, show me a sign." I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I wasn't trying to challenge anything. I just wanted an answer. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The room stayed quiet. I almost laughed at myself and thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Then, the game changed. The cards on the solitaire screen started moving. Not just normal movement from clicking. They started shifting around and bouncing quickly across the screen. It happened so fast that I froze. I stared at the monitor trying to understand what I was seeing. My first thought was that something was wrong with the computer. Maybe the game glitched. Maybe there was some kind of error. But the timing was what scared me. It happened right after I asked for a sign. The whole thing only lasted a short time, but it was enough to make me leave the room. I didn't know what to think. I had asked for something, and something unusual happened. Was it connected? Was it just a coincidence? Was there a normal explanation? I honestly didn't know. As I got older, I thought about that night many times. I wondered if maybe my fear and expectations played a role. Maybe because I already felt like the house had a strange atmosphere, my mind was looking for something. Maybe the computer had a technical issue at exactly the wrong time. There are always explanations. But the experience stayed with me. The house continued feeling strange after that. It wasn't like every day was terrifying. Most of the time, life was normal. I went to school. I had friends. I lived my life. But there was always that feeling that the house had something different about it. One day, a friend of a friend came to visit. She had never been to our house before. The strange thing was that she refused to come inside. She stopped outside, said there was something about the house that felt negative. She said she didn't feel comfortable entering. At first, I didn't know what to think. It was strange hearing someone else say something about the house without knowing the experiences I had. She didn't know about the noises. She didn't know about the pets. She didn't know about the things I had felt. But she reacted strongly. She told my mom that she should put crystals in every corner of the house for a few days. Then she said the crystals should be taken out, buried, and that she should say something out loud while doing it. My mom had already noticed that I was regularly uncomfortable in the house. She knew I had mentioned strange feelings and that sometimes I seemed genuinely scared. So, she decided to try it. She followed the advice. She placed the crystals around the house. After some time, she removed them and buried them like she was told. She also said the words she was told to say. I don't know exactly what happened afterward. I can't say for certain that anything changed because of that. But eventually, the strange feeling in the house faded. The noises became less noticeable. The heavy atmosphere seemed to disappear. The house just felt normal. The interesting thing is that nothing dramatic happened. There wasn't one huge moment where everything changed. It was more like the feeling slowly disappeared. Looking back, I realized those experiences were basically just part of my teenage years. For me, that house wasn't just a scary place. It was where I grew up. It was where I spent important years of my life. The strange moments became part of my memories of being young. Even now, I don't know exactly what was happening there. Maybe it was the age of the house. Maybe it was the history of it being a hospital. Maybe it was the way my mind reacted to living somewhere so old and isolated. Maybe there was another explanation I don't understand. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard. I know how our pets acted. And I know that the house had a strange energy that I noticed for years. Eventually, that feeling went away. The house became just a house again. But those memories from my teenage years have never completely left me. About 6 years ago, my roommates and I rented an old Victorian-style house near our college campus. From the outside, it looked like the kind of house you would expect to see in a movie. It was old, had a lot of character, and had all the little details that came with houses built many years ago. At first, we actually liked it. There was something interesting about living in an older house. The floors creaked, the doors were heavier than newer ones, and there were small things about the place that reminded us it had been there for a long time. Since we were college students, we didn't really think too much about it. We were more focused on having a place close to campus and making the most of living with friends. The house had a strange hallway closet that always stood out to us. It was deeper than a normal closet. From the outside, it didn't look like anything special. It was just a storage space near the hallway. We mostly used it to throw things we didn't need every day into. Suitcases, winter coats, old bags, and random things that we didn't have room for anywhere else. Because it was so deep, we rarely looked all the way inside. It was basically one of those places where things disappeared. You put something in there, close the door, and forget about it. None of us had any reason to think there was anything unusual about it. At least, not at first. One day, I was looking for a duffel bag that I had stored in the back of the closet. I knew it was somewhere in there, so I started moving things around and digging through everything. The farther back I reached, the stranger it felt. The closet seemed even deeper than I remembered. While searching, I noticed something unusual. The wood paneling at the back of the closet didn't feel solid. It felt loose. At first, I assumed it was just old construction. The house was old, and things moved around over time. Maybe a piece of wood had come loose or wasn't attached properly. Out of curiosity, I pushed against it. That was when it moved. The entire back panel slid to the side. Not like it broke. Not like it fell apart. It moved along what looked like an old track. I remember just standing there for a moment, because my brain was trying to understand what I was seeing. Behind the panel was a small hidden space. It wasn't a normal storage area. It was a tiny unfinished crawl space underneath the main staircase. It was completely dark inside. The kind of darkness where you can't really see anything until you shine a light. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. At first, I expected to see dust, old pipes, or maybe just an empty space. But that wasn't what was there. My phone light moved across the area, and I saw things. There was a sleeping bag. There were a couple of empty energy drink cans. And there was a paper plate with pizza crust sitting there. The pizza was the detail that made my stomach drop, because it didn't look old. The crusts still had soft, greasy cheese stuck to them. It looked like someone had eaten that pizza recently. Someone had been there, not years ago, not months ago. Recently, I remember feeling completely frozen. My first thought was that there was no way this was real. I was standing in my own house, looking into a hidden space behind a closet, and there were signs that someone had been living there. Someone had been sleeping inside our walls, literally only a few feet away from where we spent our time every day. That realization was terrifying. All the normal moments suddenly felt different. The times we sat in the living room watching TV, the times we cooked, the times we talked with each other. The whole time, there could have been someone hidden right next to us. Listening, watching, being there without us knowing. I immediately called my roommates over. When they saw what was inside, they reacted the same way I did. At first, nobody wanted to believe it. We were trying to find any other explanation. Maybe it was old. Maybe someone had left it there. Maybe there was a reason. But the pizza ruined that explanation. Old food does not stay soft and fresh-looking for months. Someone had been there recently. We started panicking. We called the police because we had no idea what else to do. We weren't sure if someone was still inside. We didn't know if whoever had been using the space had another way in or out. The idea that someone could have access to our home without us knowing was terrifying. A couple of officers arrived and checked the area. They shined their flashlights into the crawl space and looked around. But they only spent maybe 30 seconds actually checking it. They didn't seem as concerned as we were. They basically told us it was probably just old stuff left behind by previous tenants. That answer didn't make sense to us. We tried explaining. The tenant before us had moved out months earlier. There was no way the pizza crusts had been sitting there that long. They were soft. They looked recent. But the officers didn't seem convinced. They didn't even write up a report. That was one of the most frustrating parts. We felt like we had discovered something seriously disturbing, but everyone was acting like it was nothing. Afterward, when we told friends and family, most people laughed about it. They thought we were exaggerating. They thought we were just being dramatic college students. Some even suggested that maybe we had staged it as a prank. That honestly made it worse. Because we knew what we saw. We weren't trying to make a story. We were genuinely scared. The idea that someone had been living in a hidden part of the house was already difficult enough to process. Having people dismiss it made us feel even more isolated. The more we thought about it, the worse it became. Because the question was always the same. Who had been there? How long had they been there? And how often had they been there while we were home? The crawl space was right under the staircase. It was connected to the part of the house where we spent time every day. We started thinking back to every strange sound we had heard, every creaking floor, every odd noise, every moment when we thought someone was moving around upstairs or in another room. Before, those things were just normal old house sounds. Now, they felt different. We started noticing everything. We stopped feeling comfortable. Even sitting in the living room felt wrong. The worst part was knowing how easy it would have been for someone to stay hidden there. They didn't need to be in the open. They didn't need to walk through the house. They had their own little space. A place where we never looked. That was the part that bothered me the most. We weren't scared because we found an old, creepy space. We were scared because we realized someone had used it. A week after discovering it, we decided to break the lease. We didn't want to stay there anymore. The landlord was not happy about it. They threatened legal action if we didn't continue paying, and in the end, we lost our security deposit. It felt unfair because we weren't leaving because we didn't like the house. We were leaving because we didn't feel safe. But there wasn't much we could do. Eventually, we moved out. Life went on. But that experience never really left me. Even now, years later, my college friends still bring it up. They joke about the time you guys got scared of a closet. They laugh about it like it was some silly overreaction. And I understand why it sounds unbelievable. If someone told me that story, I might have trouble believing it too. But I was there. I opened that panel. I saw the sleeping bag. I saw the cans. I saw the pizza crusts. And I still remember the feeling I had when I realized someone had been inside that hidden space. The thing that still bothers me most is thinking about all the ordinary moments before we found it. All the nights we sat on the couch watching TV. All the conversations we had. All the times we walked past that closet. We had no idea that someone could have been just a few feet away from us, separated only by an old wooden panel. Listening, waiting, living there. That thought still makes me uncomfortable. Because sometimes the scariest things are not the things you see. They are the things you never realize are there. This is probably one of the scariest experiences I have ever had, and it happened when I was only 14 years old. It was around 20 years ago, but the memory has stayed with me all this time. Some moments from your life fade away, but others stay so clear that you can remember every small detail. This is one of those moments. It started on what should have been a normal night. I had gone to an all-ages night at a club, something that was common for younger people in the area. I was just a teenager spending time with friends and having a normal night out. At that age, you don't always think about how dangerous the world can sometimes be. You feel independent, but you're still a kid. When the night ended, everyone started heading home. The problem was that I lived the furthest away from everyone. My friends were all going in different directions, and eventually I was left walking home alone. The walk itself was not supposed to be a big deal. It was a familiar area, and I knew the streets well. I had walked around there many times before. It was late though, very late. It was probably around midnight or 1 a.m. The area was quiet, and then, as if the night wasn't already uncomfortable enough, it started raining heavily. I remember the rain coming down hard as I walked. The streets looked different at night, especially with the rain making everything darker and less familiar. Even though I knew the area, being alone made it feel completely different. I was trying to just focus on getting home. The walk from where I left my last friend's house to my own home was only around 10 minutes. It wasn't some long journey. The street I was on would eventually lead me to the main road, and from there, I could get straight home. I also knew the area extremely well. I had just passed my old elementary school, the school I had graduated from. It was a place I had known for years. Because of that, I felt like I was in a familiar part of town. I wasn't lost. I wasn't wandering around somewhere unknown. That is part of what made what happened next so shocking. As I started crossing the street, I suddenly heard something. A scream. A woman's scream. It was loud enough that I immediately looked up. At first, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. A woman suddenly came running out of the darkness from the parking lot area of a low-rise apartment building. She looked terrified. I remember noticing that she was tall and blonde, and she looked very thin. She was moving quickly across the grass, clearly trying to get away from something. Then I saw someone following her. A man came running after her. He was tall and lanky, and he was moving quickly. Everything happened so fast that my brain struggled to process it. 1 second, I was walking home in the rain. The next second, I was watching a situation unfold right in front of me. The man caught up to her, and she ended up on the ground. I froze. I was 14 years old. I was alone. It was the middle of the night, and I was suddenly witnessing something that felt completely wrong and dangerous. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should run, hide, call someone, or try to help. At that age, you don't always have the experience to react correctly in a frightening situation. Your brain just gets stuck, trying to understand what is happening. I remember feeling completely powerless. I was just standing there, watching, unable to move. The situation only lasted a short amount of time, but it felt much longer. The woman was trying to get away and trying to make it clear that she wanted him to stop. The man was focused on her and didn't seem to notice me at first. I was still standing there in shock. Then, he noticed me. I realized that I had been standing in the open, visible from the street. The moment he saw me, his attention changed. He looked toward me, and then he started moving toward me. That was the moment everything changed. Up until then, I had been frozen because I was scared for someone else. Now, I was scared for myself. He moved quickly in my direction, and I didn't even think. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and ran. The only thing I could think about was getting away. I ran toward the darkest direction, which honestly was probably not the smartest choice. There was a grassy park and creek area that ran parallel to the street. It was dark. There were no bright lights. It wasn't the kind of place you would normally choose to run through at night. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking logically. I just needed distance. I ran through the grass as fast as I could. The rain was still coming down, and everything around me was dark. I was trying not to fall, trying not to slow down, and trying to put as much space between myself and that street as possible. I remember how scared I was. I was only 14. I was alone. I had no idea what was happening behind me. I didn't know if someone was following me. I didn't know if the woman was okay. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I just kept running. Eventually, I reached the main road. By then, I was exhausted. I had run until I could barely catch my breath. And then, almost like something out of a movie, a police car drove past. For a second, I thought I had finally found help. But it was too far away. I couldn't get the officer's attention. I couldn't signal quickly enough. The car just kept going. I remember the frustration and fear of watching it disappear. I was right there. Help had been so close, but not close enough. So I started yelling. I was hoping someone would hear me. I was hoping the police car would somehow come back. I was hoping anyone nearby would notice, but nobody did. The street was quiet. The rain covered the sound, and I was left standing there trying to figure out what to do next. The worst part was that I couldn't even give a proper description. Everything happened so quickly. I didn't know exactly where the woman had gone. I didn't know what happened after I ran. I didn't know if anyone else saw it. I was just a scared teenager who had witnessed something terrifying. Eventually, I made it home. I don't remember every detail after that because the whole thing was such a blur. But I do remember the feeling, the fear, the helplessness, the confusion. For years afterward, I thought about the woman. I wondered what happened to her. I wondered if she was okay. I wondered if she got help. That is the part that has stayed with me the most. I was able to run away. I was able to get home. But she was still there. She was the person who was already in that situation before I even arrived. And I have always hoped that she made it out safely. Looking back now, I understand even more how young I was. A 14-year-old walking home alone late at night is already a vulnerable situation, and then suddenly being placed in the middle of something frightening like that was overwhelming. I also think about how quickly a normal night can change. I left a club. I walked through a familiar neighborhood. I passed my old school. Everything was normal. Then, within seconds, my entire reality changed. That night taught me how unpredictable life can be. It also taught me that fear can completely take over your body. Sometimes people imagine that in a scary situation they would immediately know what to do. But real fear is different. Sometimes you freeze. Sometimes your brain takes a moment to catch up. I still wish I had been able to do more. I wish I had reacted differently. I wish I had found a way to get help faster. But I was a child, alone, and terrified. All I could do was survive the moment. Even after all these years, I still remember that street. I remember the rain. I remember the darkness. I remember the sound of the scream. And most of all, I remember hoping that the woman I saw that night was eventually okay. It remains one of the most frightening moments of my life, not just because of what happened, but because of how powerless I felt watching it happen. Before the COVID-19 pandemic became something the whole world knew about, I had a strange experience that I still think about. People believe me now because everyone knows what happened, but at the time, almost nobody listened to me. Looking back, the hardest part was not even the fear of the virus itself. The hardest part was feeling like I was seeing something serious coming and being unable to convince anyone around me. At the time, I was working in health and safety. I am no longer in that job, but back then it was my responsibility to look into risks, prepare for problems, and make sure people were protected. My work involved paying attention to things that most people would not normally think about. A few months before COVID reached the UK, I was given a task related to our China office. I was asked to arrange masks. At first, it seemed like a normal work request. There was no reason for me to think it would become anything bigger. I started contacting suppliers and looking into availability, expecting it to be a simple process. But then I noticed something unusual. Nobody had masks. Not just one supplier, not just one country. Everywhere I checked, supplies were gone. That immediately caught my attention. In my job, when something unusual happens, you investigate. A shortage like that does not happen without a reason. I started looking deeper into what was happening. The more I researched, the more concerning it became. I started finding information about a new illness spreading in China. At first, there was not much public information available. It was difficult to understand exactly what was happening because things were changing quickly. But there were warning signs. The thing that really made me worried was seeing reports of Chinese doctors trying to raise the alarm online. They were trying to tell people that something serious was happening, and then some of them disappeared from public view. That scared me. It was not just the illness itself. It was the lack of information. When people who are close to a situation start warning others and then suddenly stop being heard, it makes you pay attention. I started thinking about the possibilities. If this was spreading the way it seemed to be spreading, it could become much bigger than people realized. And the more I looked into it, the more serious it appeared. I tried to warn people. I tried to tell my coworkers. I tried to explain why I thought this could become a major problem. But nobody believed me. Not one person. At that time, most people saw it as something happening far away, something happening in another country, something that probably would not affect their everyday lives. When I brought it up in meetings, people laughed. I was dismissed. Some people treated me like I was overreacting. They thought I was worrying about something that would never reach us. The frustrating thing was that I wasn't saying the worst possible outcome. I wasn't predicting the full scale of what eventually happened. I was only saying that there was a serious risk and that we needed to prepare. But even that seemed impossible for people to accept. The situation became even more difficult because I started feeling like nobody understood why I was concerned. I was looking at the information through the lens of my job. Health and safety is about preparation. You don't wait until something becomes a disaster before you take precautions. You prepare before. That is the entire point. But to everyone else, it looked like I was reacting to something that was not a threat yet. I even talked about it with my therapist. Instead of seeing my concerns as a reasonable response to what I was finding, my therapist thought I might be imagining things or becoming overly worried. That was difficult. Because I was not trying to create fear. I was trying to get people to pay attention. I remember feeling incredibly isolated during that period. It felt like I was the only person who was taking it seriously. The strange thing is that the things I was saying were not even as extreme as what eventually happened. The reality became much worse than my fears. But before anyone knew that, I looked like the person who was panicking. Around a week before everything really changed, I became concerned about another situation. My mother's priest was still holding services, and I started thinking about how vulnerable some of the people attending were. A lot of the congregation were elderly. Many had health problems. I started thinking about communion, the line of people, the close contact, the possibility that if one person who was infected took part and then others followed, it could potentially spread among a group of people who were at higher risk. So I contacted him. I told him he needed to stop giving communion. I explained why I thought it was dangerous. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I was worried about people who could be seriously affected. But instead of agreeing, he contacted my mother because he was concerned about me. He thought something was wrong with my mental health. That was another moment where I felt completely unheard. People were not just disagreeing with me, they were questioning whether I was thinking clearly. I started making changes in my own life because I felt like I had no other choice. At work, I stopped shaking hands. I started using alcohol hand sanitizer regularly. I tried to explain to my boss and coworkers what I believed was coming. Again, most people did not take it seriously. They thought I was being extreme. But I continued preparing. I bought enough food to last around 2 weeks. I wasn't trying to panic buy or prepare for the end of the world. I just thought that if something serious happened, basic preparation would make life easier. That seemed logical to me. My family did not see it that way. Eventually, they tried to have an intervention. They sat me down and told me I needed to stop acting strangely. They believed I was behaving irrationally. They thought I was letting fear control me. That moment was incredibly painful, because the people closest to me also did not understand. I started wondering if maybe everyone else was right. Maybe I really was overthinking. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe I was seeing danger where there wasn't any. That was the hardest part, not knowing whether you are correct or whether you are losing perspective. Then, about a week later, everything changed. The situation exploded. The world suddenly started talking about what I had been warning people about. The things I had been worried about became real. The lockdown started. People started talking about masks. People started worrying about shortages. People started realizing that this was not just something happening somewhere else. It was happening everywhere. I remember the strange feeling of watching everything unfold. There was no satisfaction in being right. That is something people misunderstand. When you warn people about something terrible, and then it happens, you don't feel like you won. You feel sad. You feel frustrated. You think about all the times you tried to get people to prepare. I remember one evening, shortly after lockdown started. I went for a walk to the petrol station because I needed to stretch my legs. The world felt completely different. The streets were quieter. Everything felt unfamiliar. Then I saw something that made the whole moment even more surreal. There was a herd of deer standing in the middle of the road. It was such a strange sight. A road that normally had cars and people was almost empty. The animals were just there, completely calm. I stood there looking at them, and it felt like the world had changed overnight. That moment really stayed with me. Because before that, I had spent so much time questioning myself. I had wondered if I was imagining things. I had wondered if I was less capable than other people. For a long time, I had believed I wasn't as intelligent as everyone else. I compared myself to others and assumed I was somehow behind. But standing there, seeing everything that had happened, I started realizing something. Maybe I was not wrong. Maybe I was not less than everyone else. Maybe I had simply noticed something before other people did. That realization changed how I saw myself. Slowly, some people apologized. Some admitted that I had been right to be concerned. Some acknowledged that I had been trying to help. But not everyone did. There were still people who never apologized. Some people could not accept that they had dismissed me and that I had been correct. I think that was difficult for them. People do not always like admitting they were wrong, especially when they were very confident before. Looking back now, the whole experience taught me a lot. It taught me about trusting evidence. It taught me about preparation. It taught me about how difficult it can be to communicate a risk before everyone else sees it. When something is still developing, people often wait for obvious proof. But by the time something becomes obvious, it can already be too late to prepare properly. I also learned something personal. For years, I thought being different from other people meant being worse. I thought if I noticed things differently, or worried about things others ignored, it meant there was something wrong with me. But that experience changed that belief. Sometimes people are simply looking at the same situation from different angles. Sometimes one person notices something earlier than others. That does not automatically mean they are wrong. The whole period was one of the strangest experiences of my life. I went from feeling like nobody believed me to watching the entire world face the exact situation I had been trying to warn people about. I never wanted to be right about something like that. I just wanted people to be safe. And even now, when I think back to those early days, the thing I remember most is not the fear. It is the feeling of standing alone with a warning that nobody wanted to hear. Then watching reality slowly prove it. I was around 10 years old when this happened. And even now, years later, it is still one of those memories that I cannot completely shake. There are certain childhood moments that stay in your mind because they are strange, confusing, and impossible to forget. This was one of those moments for me. I was staying over at my cousin's grandmother's house with my cousin, my uncle, and her grandma. It was just a normal family visit, the kind of thing that happens all the time when you are a kid. I wasn't expecting anything unusual to happen. I was just there to spend time with my cousin and enjoy the night. The house itself was a 2-story house, and my cousin's bedroom was upstairs. The layout is something I still remember clearly because of what happened later. Her room was upstairs, and directly across the hallway from her doorway was another bedroom. That other bedroom was not really being used. It was basically a storage room filled with boxes, old things, and random junk. It had that feeling a lot of unused rooms have, where nobody really goes in there unless they need something. It was full of things that had been collected over the years but never organized. Because of that, it always looked a little strange. The room was dark most of the time. There wasn't much reason to turn the lights on because nobody spent time in there. That night, my cousin and I were just hanging out in her room, playing and doing whatever kids do. We weren't thinking about anything scary. It was a normal evening. At some point, my uncle called upstairs and told us it was time to come downstairs for dinner. My cousin immediately started getting ready to go down. I, however, was doing what kids always do, taking my time. I was messing around, probably not paying attention, and I ended up being the last one leaving the room. Everyone else had already started heading downstairs. I was just about to walk out of the bedroom door when something caught my attention. It came from across the hallway, the room full of boxes and junk. At first, I thought I saw movement, just a small movement in the darkness. I stopped. I remember that moment because everything suddenly became quiet in my mind. A second earlier, I was thinking about dinner. I was thinking about normal things. Then suddenly I was standing there, staring into a dark room. The lights were off, so I couldn't see inside clearly. But I had the feeling that something had moved. I could have just ignored it. I could have walked downstairs. That would have been the normal thing to do. But curiosity got the better of me. I stood there and looked. I was a kid, and kids do that. When you think you saw something, you want to know what it was. Even if something feels strange, part of you wants to investigate. So I paused. I kept looking into that dark room. At first I didn't see anything, just boxes. Just shadows. Just the outline of random objects piled up. Then, I saw it. Someone walked across the room, and when I say someone, I mean something that looked like a person wearing a costume. It was an orange orangutan costume, not a realistic one, not something that looked like a real animal. It looked like one of those cheap costumes you might see at a party or a store. The kind with thin, scratchy-looking fur and an oversized shape. I remember the color clearly. Bright orange. The fur, the shape of the costume. The way it moved. And the thing that scared me the most was that it looked directly at me. It wasn't just walking across the room. It was looking at me while it moved. I remember seeing the face of the costume turn toward me, almost like it knew. I was standing there. That was the moment my brain completely froze. I was only 10 years old. I had no idea what I was looking at. For a split second, I couldn't move. It was like my body stopped working before my thoughts caught up. Then, fear took over. I ran. I didn't stop to figure out what it was. I didn't stop to check if there was actually someone in the room. I just turned around and ran down the stairs. I remember the panic more than anything else. My heart was racing. My whole body felt like it was reacting before I could even think. I was yelling for my uncle. I don't even remember exactly what I said. I just remember needing an adult. I remember being absolutely convinced that something was wrong. When I got downstairs, I tried to explain what happened. But I was a scared kid, and I probably didn't explain it clearly. I was probably talking too fast. I was probably not making much sense. My uncle didn't believe me. And honestly, I understand why. From his perspective, he had called us downstairs for dinner, and suddenly I came running in scared, claiming I saw someone in a room that nobody used. It probably sounded like a child's imagination. A weird story. Something I had made up or misunderstood. He didn't seem worried. He didn't rush upstairs to check. He just brushed it off. I remember feeling frustrated because I knew what I had seen. To me, it was not a misunderstanding. It felt real. But nobody else reacted like it was real. So, we ate dinner. That was the strangest part. The night just continued. Everyone acted normal. We had dinner, and eventually I was taken back home, but I never forgot what happened upstairs. Over the years, I have tried to think of possible explanations. Maybe there was someone in the room. Maybe someone was wearing a costume. Maybe there was a reflection or a shadow that my brain turned into something recognizable. Maybe I saw something incorrectly because the room was dark. There are many possible explanations, and as an adult, I understand that. But the reason it stayed with me is because of how clear it felt. I wasn't just scared by a random shadow. I remember details. I remember the orange color. I remember the costume-like appearance. I remember the way it moved. I remember it looking at me. That last part is what bothers me the most. If I had seen something in the corner of my eye, maybe I could have dismissed it more easily. But I stopped. I looked. I watched. And the thing that looked like a person in a costume moved across the room while facing me. That memory has stayed incredibly strong. Another thing that made it worse was the fact that my childhood imagination was already influenced by horror movies. I had seen scary movies that were definitely not meant for kids. So my brain was already familiar with scary ideas. Because of that, when I saw something strange, my mind immediately went to the worst possible place. I wasn't thinking, maybe this is someone joking around. I wasn't thinking, maybe there's a normal explanation. My child brain went straight to fear. I was convinced I was in danger. I thought something terrible was about to happen. That is probably why the memory affected me so much. It wasn't just seeing something unusual, it was the feeling of being completely powerless. I was alone upstairs. The hallway was quiet. There was a dark room across from me. And then something appeared that I could not explain. Looking back, I realize how strange the situation actually was. If someone had been in that room wearing a costume, there would have been questions. Why were they there? Why were the lights off? Why were they silently walking around a storage room? Why did nobody else know? But there was never an answer. Nobody ever found anything. Nobody ever admitted it was a prank. The room was just a room. And that made the memory even stranger, because after that night, the bedroom across the hallway was still just there, the same door, the same storage room, the same boxes. But I always remembered what I saw inside. Even years later, thinking about it can still make me uncomfortable. Sometimes your body remembers fear, even when your mind tries to explain things logically. I can still feel that moment when I froze, that tiny second when I was standing there trying to understand what I was seeing. Then the panic, then running, then trying to convince everyone that something happened. The hardest part is that nobody else experienced it. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else could confirm it. So I was left with only my own memory. And that memory has never changed. I still get a strange feeling thinking about it, because it was such a bizarre thing to see. A person in an orange orangutan costume walking through a dark room is already weird enough. But seeing it as a child, alone in a hallway at night, and having it look directly at you, that was terrifying. I don't know exactly what happened that night. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe my brain misunderstood something in the darkness. Maybe it was something completely normal that I didn't understand at the time. But I know how real it felt. And that is why, after all these years, it is still one of the strangest and scariest memories I have. My strangest unexplained experience happened back in the late 1980s, and it is something I have kept to myself for a very long time. I have told almost nobody about it, not because I think it was impossible or because I am ashamed of it, but because I never really knew how to explain it without sounding like I was making a wild claim. Even now, years later, I still don't have an answer for what my wife and I saw that night. It was a warm summer night, the kind of night where the air feels heavy and there is no rush to get anywhere. My wife and I were out riding our motorcycle, just enjoying the weather and being together. There was something peaceful about being out late at night when everything was quieter. The roads were mostly empty, and it felt like we had the whole world to ourselves. At some point during the ride, we decided to pull off into a parking area to take a break and stretch. It was not a busy place. There were no bright lights around. The parking area was unlit, which meant there was very little blocking our view of the sky. We were far enough away from the usual distractions that the stars were incredibly visible. That was actually the reason we stopped. We were not looking for anything unusual. We were not trying to find something strange. We were simply looking up and admiring how clear the sky was. The stars were everywhere. On a warm summer night like that, when you are away from city lights, the sky can look completely different. You notice things you normally miss. There are so many stars that it almost feels unreal. My wife and I were both just standing there, looking upward. Then we noticed something. At first, it looked like another star. Just a small dot of light in the sky. Nothing about it immediately seemed unusual. It was just there. But after watching it for a moment, we realized it was moving. That was the first thing that caught our attention. A star should not move like that. So we kept watching. The object was not moving like a plane. It was not flashing. There were no obvious lights changing. It just looked like a small point of light traveling across the sky. I remember thinking that maybe it was a satellite. That was the explanation my brain immediately wanted to accept. A satellite made sense. It was something real, something normal, something that could explain why we were seeing a moving point of light above us. So we watched it, trying to figure out exactly what it was. For a little while it moved in a way that seemed fairly normal. Then, everything changed. The object suddenly changed direction, not gradually, not like something turning in a wide curve. It moved left. It traveled that way for a bit. And then, completely unexpectedly, it shot off in another direction. It was like it instantly changed course. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like it just moved somewhere else. Then, it was gone. Not slowly disappearing, not fading away, just gone. The whole thing happened quickly, but it was long enough that we both clearly saw it. The weirdest part was not just what happened. It was the fact that we both reacted at exactly the same time. We looked at each other and said something like, "Did you see that?" Because neither of us wanted to be the first person to say it. There is something strange about seeing something you cannot explain. Your first instinct is usually to find a normal reason. You think, "I must have misunderstood." You think, there has to be an obvious explanation. You don't immediately jump to something unusual. And that is exactly what happened with us. We both saw it. We both knew it was not just one of us imagining something. That was the part that really stuck with me. If I had seen it alone, I could have questioned myself forever. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes played tricks on me. Maybe I misunderstood what I was seeing. But my wife saw the exact same thing. We were standing next to each other, looking at the same part of the sky, watching the same object. And we both had the same reaction. After it disappeared, we did not stand there trying to figure it out for an hour. We didn't search the sky. We didn't try to convince ourselves of anything. We just got back on the motorcycle and left. Fast, the whole experience had suddenly changed the mood. A few moments earlier, we were relaxed, enjoying the night and looking at the stars. Afterward, we just wanted to be somewhere else. I still remember the feeling of getting back on the bike. It was not exactly panic. It was more like a strong feeling of, okay, we should go now. Neither of us really said much. There wasn't much to say. What were we supposed to say? We just saw something move in a way we don't understand? It sounded strange even to ourselves. That was one reason we never really talked about it afterward. We did not tell friends. We did not tell family. We didn't bring it up in normal conversations. Not because we thought nobody would believe us, but because we didn't even know what we believed ourselves. The late 1980s were also a different time. Today, people are much more familiar with drones, advanced aircraft, and all kinds of technology that can appear unusual in the sky. But back then, drones were not something most people were thinking about. There were no small consumer drones flying around. So that explanation does not fit. I have tried to think of normal explanations over the years. The one my brain likes the most is a satellite. That is the comfortable answer. A satellite moving through the sky is completely possible. It would explain seeing a point of light moving. It would explain why it looked like a star. That is the explanation I would prefer. The problem is the movement, the sudden change, the way it seemed to move left and then immediately go another direction before disappearing. That is the part I cannot easily explain. I am not saying it was definitely anything specific. I am not saying I know what it was. I honestly have no idea. That is probably why the memory stayed with me. It was not because I had some amazing belief or because I wanted it to be something mysterious. It was because I saw something that did not fit neatly into an explanation. People often imagine that seeing something unexplained is some dramatic experience, like there is some huge moment where you instantly understand what is happening. That was not what happened for us. It was actually very ordinary. Two people on a motorcycle. A warm night, stopping for a few minutes, looking at the stars, then seeing something strange. That is what makes it feel so real to me. There was no reason for us to be looking for anything. We were not expecting anything. We were just there. I have thought about that night many times over the years. Sometimes I wonder if there was something obvious that we missed. Maybe there was a type of aircraft I did not know about. Maybe there was some natural phenomenon. Maybe it was a satellite and our perception of the movement was wrong. The human brain is amazing, but it can also misinterpret things, especially when you are looking at a dark sky with very few reference points. That is always possible. But then I remember my wife seeing it too. And I remember how quickly we both reacted. The shared experience is what makes it difficult to dismiss. It was not a story I heard from someone else. It was not something I saw on a video. It was something that happened right in front of us. For years, I barely mentioned it. It became one of those private memories that I carried around. Something I would occasionally think about, but never really discuss. The only reason I am talking about it now is because sharing it anonymously feels easier. There is something about being able to tell a strange story without worrying about people immediately judging you. Because the truth is, I am not trying to convince anyone. I do not need people to believe that it was something extraordinary. I just know what I saw. My wife saw it too. And we both remember the same thing. A small point of light in the sky. Something that looked like a star. Something that moved. Something that changed direction in a way we could not explain. And then, just like that, it was gone. Even after all these years, I still look up at the sky sometimes and think about that night. The universe is huge. There are things we understand, and there are things we are still learning about. Maybe there is a simple explanation that I have never discovered. Maybe someday someone will explain exactly what we saw. But until then, It remains one of the strangest moments of my life. A quiet summer night. A motorcycle parked under an open sky, and a light that moved like nothing I had ever seen before. My mother passed away because of severe mental illness, and the months after her death were some of the hardest times of my life. Losing someone is already difficult, but losing someone after watching them struggle for so long leaves behind a complicated mix of emotions. There is sadness, confusion, and a lot of unanswered questions. Even though time has passed, there are still moments that remind me of her. This happened a few months after she died. I was at home with my brother, and we were in the dining room looking for glue. It was not some important or emotional moment at first. It was just a normal situation. We needed glue for something, and we assumed it would be somewhere in the house. We started checking places where we thought it might be. Drawers, cabinets, random storage areas. Like most homes, we had a lot of things tucked away in different places, so finding something small could sometimes take longer than expected. We searched around but couldn't find it. After a while, my brother made a comment that probably came from the frustration of not finding what we needed. He said, "Mom would have known where it is." It was a simple sentence, nothing dramatic. Just a normal thing to say when you miss someone who used to know where everything was. My mom had been the person who remembered where things were kept. A lot of parents have that role in a family. They know where the batteries are, where the tools are, where the random items nobody else can find are hidden. So hearing my brother say that actually made sense. Then, only a second later, something happened that neither of us expected. One of the bottom drawers in the cabinet suddenly opened. Not slowly, not gently. It opened with force. The movement was so sudden and strong that it immediately grabbed our attention. It wasn't like the drawer had slowly slid out because it was loose. It looked like someone had pulled it open, and not carefully. It looked like whoever opened it had used too much force. Both of us froze. The timing was what made it so strange. My brother had just mentioned my mother. Then the drawer opened, right after. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stared. The drawer was open, and inside was the glue, sitting right there, in the middle. That was the part that really bothered me. Because the glue wasn't just somewhere in the drawer. It was right where we could see it, almost like it had been placed there for us to find. But there were several reasons that made the whole thing confusing. First, neither of us had opened that drawer. We were standing a good distance away from the cabinet. We were not touching it. Second, nobody else was in the house. There was no one who could have walked in and done it. And third, that was not even a place where we would normally keep the glue. It was not the obvious drawer. It was not the first place we would have checked. Even more strangely, neither of us remembered putting it there. It was just there. Right after we talked about my mother, I remember the feeling afterward more than anything else. It wasn't pure fear. It was confusion. Because my brain was immediately trying to find a normal explanation. There had to be one. That is how I normally think. I am not someone who believes every strange event has a paranormal explanation. I have always been the type of person who looks for practical reasons first. Maybe the drawer was already loose. Maybe something caused it to move. Maybe there was some kind of pressure or imbalance. Maybe we simply missed seeing the glue earlier. There are plenty of possible explanations, and honestly, I wanted one. Because the alternative was much harder to process. The timing was just too strange. If the drawer had opened randomly at any other time, maybe I would have forgotten about it. Old furniture moves. Things fall. Objects shift. Strange things happen. but it happened immediately after my brother mentioned my mother. That is the part I have never been able to completely ignore. My mother's death was still very fresh at that point. We were still adjusting to life without her. The house probably felt different too. When someone important is gone, a home can feel different even though everything is physically the same. The same rooms, the same furniture, the same objects. But the person who made it feel like home is missing. So maybe that is why the moment affected me so much. It happened at a time when we were already emotionally vulnerable. A time when we were already thinking about her. A time when we missed her. And then something happened that felt like a response. I have never told many people about it. Actually, I have barely told anyone. The reason is simple. I don't think most people would believe me. And I understand why. If someone told me this story, I would probably have questions too. I would wonder what the explanation was. I would wonder if there was some detail they missed. That is natural. People want things to make sense. And the truth is, I don't even fully believe in paranormal things myself. I have never been someone who automatically believes in ghosts, spirits, or signs from the afterlife. I have always been skeptical. I like explanations that can be proven. I like things that make sense. But this experience made me question that. Not because it proved anything. It didn't. A single strange event is not enough to prove something supernatural. There could be an explanation that I have never found. There could be something completely ordinary that caused it, but what it did do was make me realize that sometimes things happen that we cannot immediately explain. And when those things happen at emotional moments, they can stay with you. I still think about that drawer sometimes. I think about the sound, the sudden movement, the fact that the glue was right there, the fact that my brother had just mentioned my mother. It is the combination of all those details that makes it unforgettable. The drawer itself is not the strangest part. The strange part is the timing. It felt like a reply, almost like something saying, "I'm still here." And that is a strange thing for me to admit, because I don't know if I believe that. Part of me still looks for a logical explanation. Another part of me remembers exactly how it felt in that moment. My brother and I were both there. We both saw it happen. Neither of us had a reason to create the story. It was just one of those moments that happened. I also think about my mother when I remember it. Not just the illness, not just the difficult parts, but the person she was. The person who would have known where the glue was. That simple comment from my brother was really about missing her. Missing the way she knew everything. Missing the normal parts of life before everything changed. Maybe that is why the moment felt meaningful. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence. Maybe the drawer had a mechanical problem. Maybe there was some explanation we never discovered. Or maybe it was something else. I honestly don't know. I don't claim to have proof of anything. I don't claim to know what happens after death. But I do know that experience stayed with me. It made me question things I had never questioned before. Because before that day, I would have said I didn't believe in anything like that. Afterward, I still wasn't convinced. But I was less certain, and sometimes one unexplained moment is enough to make you reconsider what you thought you knew. For me, that moment happened in a dining room while looking for something as simple as glue. My brother mentioned our mother. A drawer opened, and there it was, exactly where we needed it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. I still don't have an answer. I only have the memory. One of the strangest things I have ever experienced was not necessarily the scariest moment of my life, but looking back, it easily could have become one if things had gone differently. At the time, I didn't even know if what I had seen was real. In fact, for a while I convinced myself that I must have imagined it. The funny part is that the people who were with me still like to joke about it, even though I ended up being right. This happened while I was driving through the city one day. It was a completely ordinary afternoon, and there was nothing unusual about the drive. I was with a few other people in the car, and we were just heading to wherever we needed to go. We came to a stop at a set of traffic lights. Like most people do when they are waiting for the light to change, I started casually looking around. There was nothing interesting happening on the road in front of us, so I glanced over to my right. Next to the intersection was a large, mostly empty parking lot. It looked quiet. There were only a few parked cars, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I saw something that made absolutely no sense. Running across the parking lot was what looked like a lion. At first, my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. It was so unexpected that I actually stared for a second, trying to understand it. But the more I looked, the more convinced I became that it really was a lion. It wasn't standing still. It was running. Behind it, I could see people moving around. Some looked like they were running away from it. Others looked like they were chasing after it. The entire scene only lasted a few moments, but it was enough for me to realize that something very unusual was happening. I remember thinking, that can't be right. There shouldn't have been a lion. We were in the middle of the city. This wasn't somewhere you would ever expect to see a wild animal. It also wasn't a country where lions live naturally. The only lions you would normally ever see were inside a zoo. That made the whole thing seem impossible. I immediately turned to the people in the car and told them what I had just seen. I said there was a lion running through the parking lot. Naturally, they thought I was joking. They all turned to look, but by then, the lion had disappeared from view. They looked around for a few seconds and saw nothing. As far as they were concerned, the parking lot was empty. They started laughing. They thought I was making the whole thing up. Some of them teased me, asking if I was seeing things. Others just rolled their eyes. Nobody believed me. The traffic light turned green before I had a chance to argue with them. We drove through the intersection and turned the corner. That was when we saw something else. There was a huge circus being set up nearby. Large trucks were parked everywhere. Workers were unloading equipment. Big tents were going up. The whole area was busy with preparations. The moment I saw the circus, I immediately pointed at it. I said, "See? I bet the lion came from there." To me, it suddenly made perfect sense. If there was a circus nearby with animals, then maybe one of them had somehow escaped. But the people with me still weren't convinced. They kept saying I must have imagined it. They told me I probably saw a large dog or something else and convinced myself it was a lion. The more they questioned me, the more I started questioning myself. That's the strange thing about situations like that. When everyone around you says you're wrong, you begin to wonder if your own memory is reliable. Maybe I really had seen something else. Maybe my brain filled in the details. Maybe I only thought it was a lion because it happened so quickly. For the rest of the day, I kept thinking about it. The image was still clear in my mind. I remembered the way it was running. I remembered the people around it. I remembered the size. But because nobody else had seen it, I slowly started doubting myself. Eventually, we finished whatever we had gone out to do and went home. By that point, I had almost convinced myself to let it go. It was just one of those weird moments that probably had some simple explanation. That evening, I was watching the nightly news. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Then, the story came on. The news reporter explained that one of the lions from the circus being set up earlier that day had escaped. The lion had been spotted running through a nearby parking lot before it was safely captured. Thankfully, nobody had been injured. I remember just sitting there staring at the television. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't imagining things. I had actually seen the lion. Everything suddenly made sense. The parking lot, the people running, the people chasing after it, the circus nearby. It all fit together perfectly. I remember feeling a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. Not because a lion had escaped. That could have ended very badly. Thankfully, it didn't. But because I finally knew I hadn't imagined the whole thing. After hearing everyone tell me I was wrong, it was nice to know I had actually seen what I thought I saw. The next time I saw the people who had been in the car with me, I made sure to tell them about the news story. I reminded them that I had been telling the truth the entire time. Of course, they laughed about it. Now it has become one of those stories that always comes up whenever we talk about strange experiences. Whenever someone mentions unbelievable stories, I remind them about the day I spotted a lion running through a city parking lot before anyone else believed it. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous the situation could have been. A fully grown lion is an incredibly powerful animal. If things had gone differently, someone could have been seriously hurt. Thankfully, the people chasing it were able to keep the situation under control until it was captured. In the end, nobody was injured, and the whole event became more of an unbelievable memory than a tragedy. It also taught me something interesting. Sometimes you really do see something that sounds impossible. Sometimes reality is so unusual that even the people standing right next to you refuse to believe it. If someone had told me they saw a lion running through a city parking lot, I probably would have been skeptical too. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something from a movie. But every now and then, real life produces moments that are stranger than fiction. For me, this was one of those moments. I was stopped at a traffic light. I glanced out the window. I saw something that should not have existed in that place. Nobody believed me. Then, just a few hours later, the evening news proved that what I had seen was completely real. To this day, whenever the story comes up, I still remind everyone in that car that I wasn't making it up. I really did see the lion first. And even after all these years, they still have to admit that I was right. One of the most frightening experiences I have ever had happened when I was a teenager living in Indiana. It wasn't anything supernatural, and there were no ghosts or strange creatures involved. But to this day, it still makes me uneasy whenever I think about it. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and instinctively look toward the nearest window. That one moment left a lasting impression on me. At the time, I was living in a 2-story house with my family. It was an older home, and one of its most unique features was a sunroom attached to the back of the house. My bedroom happened to be directly above that sunroom, and because of the way the house was built, my bedroom window overlooked its roof. Right next to the house was a large oak tree. The branches stretched close enough to the roof that, with a little effort, someone could climb the tree, step onto the sunroom roof, and reach my bedroom window. As a teenager, I quickly realized how useful that was. Like a lot of teenagers, I occasionally wanted to sneak out of the house without anyone noticing. Instead of using the front door and risking someone hearing me, I would climb out my bedroom window, cross the roof of the sunroom, and use the oak tree to get down to the ground. It wasn't the safest idea, but when you're young, you don't always think about things like that. After a while, it became a routine. I knew exactly where to step. I knew which branches were strong enough to hold my weight. I knew how to get back inside without making much noise. Because I had done it so many times, I stopped thinking about how easily someone else could use that exact same path. That thought never crossed my mind. One evening, I was in my room like I normally was. I was sitting at my computer, completely focused on whatever I was doing. I don't remember exactly what I was looking at or playing anymore, because everything that happened afterward completely erased those details from my memory. The house was quiet. Everyone else was somewhere else in the house. It felt like an ordinary night. Then I heard something. A rustling sound. At first, I barely paid attention to it. The oak tree was right outside my window, so hearing branches move wasn't unusual. Wind could make the leaves shake. Squirrels often climbed around in the tree, and sometimes raccoons wandered through the neighborhood at night. There were plenty of normal explanations. But after another second, the sound seemed closer, almost like something was right outside my window. I looked up. What I saw made every muscle in my body lock up. There was a man's face staring directly through my bedroom window. Not a reflection, not a shadow, a face. He was so close to the glass that I could clearly see him. His skin looked incredibly pale. He was completely bald. But the thing I remember most vividly was his eyes. They were wide open, unnaturally wide. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't trying to hide. He was staring directly at me. For a split second, we just looked at each other. I don't know how long that moment actually lasted. It could have been 1 second. It could have been 2. But in my memory, it feels much longer. Everything seemed to stop. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There shouldn't have been anyone outside my second-floor bedroom window. Nobody should have been able to stand there. Then the fear hit me all at once. I screamed, not a small yell, a full scream. I jumped out of my chair and ran out of my bedroom as fast as I could. I wasn't thinking about anything except getting away from that window. I remember running through the house trying to find an adult as quickly as possible. My uncle was home, so I grabbed him and told him there was someone outside my window. I was terrified. I knew what I had seen. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't imagining a shadow. I had looked directly into another person's face. My uncle came upstairs with me to check. By the time we got back to my room, whoever had been outside was gone. The window was empty. The roof was empty. There was no sign of anyone. I expected my uncle to take it seriously. Instead, he looked around and shrugged. He told me it was probably raccoons. I couldn't believe that was his explanation. Raccoons don't have human faces. They don't stand outside second-story windows staring directly at people. I knew the difference. But because there was no one there anymore, he wasn't convinced. To him, it probably sounded like I had scared myself after hearing something outside. Maybe he thought my imagination had taken over. Maybe he genuinely believed it had been an animal. Either way, he wasn't worried. I was. That night changed the way I looked at that window forever. Before then, it had been my secret escape route. Afterward, it became the place where I had seen a complete stranger looking into my bedroom. The more I thought about it, the worse it became. That person had climbed the exact route I used. The tree, the roof, the window. That meant they knew it was possible. I don't know whether they had been watching the house. I don't know whether they had seen me use that route before. I don't know if they were just passing through, or if they specifically came to that window. Those are questions I have never been able to answer. And honestly, I don't know which answer would be worse. For a long time afterward, I became nervous whenever I heard anything outside at night. Every little sound from the tree caught my attention. Every branch moving in the wind made me stop and listen. Even though nothing like that ever happened again, the fear stayed with me. Years have passed since then. I've lived in different houses. I've had different bedrooms. But every now and then, I'll wake up suddenly in the middle of the night. Before I even realize what I'm doing, I find myself looking toward the nearest window, almost as if part of my brain is still checking to make sure nobody is standing there. It's strange how one moment can permanently change the way you react. People often think trauma has to come from something huge. Sometimes it comes from a single image that your brain never completely lets go of. For me, it was that face. The pale skin, the bald head, the wide eyes staring straight at me through the glass. I still don't know who that man was. I don't know why he was there. I don't know how long he had been standing outside before I noticed him. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't looked up when I did. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he was just someone who climbed up as a prank. Maybe he intended to run away the moment he was spotted. Or maybe it could have turned into something much worse. I'll never know. Looking back now, I'm just grateful that I screamed immediately instead of freezing. The noise brought someone else upstairs. Whoever that man was, he disappeared before anything else could happen. Nothing was stolen. Nobody was hurt. But the memory never left me. People sometimes ask what the scariest thing I've ever seen was. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was simply the unexpected sight of another human being standing outside my second-story bedroom window in the middle of the night, staring directly at me. Sometimes, real life is frightening enough without needing anything paranormal. And even now, after all these years, I still catch myself checking windows before I can fully relax, just to make sure there isn't another face looking back at me. One of the closest calls I have ever had happened when I was 18 years old, and even now I still wonder how differently that day could have ended. Looking back, I honestly think I survived because of something that sounds completely ridiculous. A clown costume. At the time, I was attending college in Miami. Alongside school, I was part of a church group that spent a lot of time doing volunteer work around the city. Most of what we did focused on helping local communities, especially neighborhoods where children didn't have many opportunities during the summer. One of our biggest projects was running a summer program for kids. We organized games, activities, music, crafts, and anything else that could give the children a safe place to spend part of their day. None of us were paid. We were simply a group of young people who wanted to help however we could. That summer, our group was assigned to work in Overtown. Back in the late 1980s, Overtown had a reputation for being one of the roughest neighborhoods in Miami. Crime was common, drugs were everywhere, and shootings were not unusual. Even people who had never been there knew its reputation. Most people who didn't live there avoided it. We knew the neighborhood had problems, but our focus wasn't on the danger. We were there for the kids. Every day we'd set up games, hand out snacks, perform skits, and try to create a few hours where children could simply enjoy being kids. Many of the families appreciated what we were doing. Some parents thanked us. Grandparents would sit on their porches watching the activities. The children would run around laughing and playing. Despite everything the neighborhood was dealing with, there were still good people trying to make the best of difficult circumstances. One afternoon, while we were setting up for another day of activities, an older black woman called me over from her front porch. She had been watching us for a while. She smiled warmly and said something I'll never forget. "It's nice what you white boys are doing for the babies." Then, she paused, "But you better make sure my grandsons don't come around." I wasn't sure what she meant. Then, she smiled even wider and said, "They'll shoot you." After saying it, she burst into laughter. She laughed so hard that I almost thought she was joking. I laughed awkwardly too, not really knowing how to respond. But looking back now, I don't think she was joking at all. I think she was warning me the only way she knew how. At the time, I didn't fully understand just how serious life in that neighborhood could be. A few days later, I found out. For some reason, I can't even remember now, I ended up walking alone a couple of blocks away from the park where our program was taking place. Normally, we stayed together, but that afternoon I happened to be by myself. I was walking casually down the sidewalk, thinking about whatever errand I was doing. Nothing seemed unusual. The streets were quiet. I turned the corner of a building without thinking twice. The moment I stepped around that corner, everything changed. I almost walked directly into two men. They were standing so close that we nearly collided. One of the men was holding a large plastic shopping bag. Inside that larger bag were dozens of smaller plastic bags. Each one was filled with a white powder. I didn't need anyone to explain what I was looking at. Back then, Miami had become famous for its drug trade. Let's just say baking powder seemed to be incredibly popular in Miami during 1989. Whether it actually was baking powder or not, I think everyone can guess what it probably wasn't. The second we saw each other, all three of us froze. Neither of them had expected someone to suddenly appear around that corner, and I certainly hadn't expected to walk into whatever business they were conducting. Everything happened almost instantly. Both men shouted. At nearly the same time, they both pulled out pistols. 1 second they were standing there. The next second, both guns were pointed directly at me. I can still picture it. The barrels aimed straight in my direction. For a split second, nobody moved. Time seemed to stop. People always ask what goes through your mind when something like that happens. The truth is, not much. Your brain doesn't have time to form complicated thoughts. You're simply overwhelmed. Your body freezes. Every instinct tells you that one wrong movement could be your last. I don't know exactly how long we stood there. Maybe 1 second, maybe 2. It felt much longer. Then, somehow, my brain decided on the simplest possible response. I quietly said, "Pardon me." That's it. No yelling, no running, no sudden movement, just pardon me. Then I slowly walked between them. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't reach into my pockets. I didn't turn around. I simply kept walking. Every step felt like it took forever. I was completely aware that both guns were still behind me. I knew that if they believed I had seen too much, they could shoot me at any second. Everything depended on convincing them that I wasn't a threat. So I acted as though I had walked into the wrong place by accident and wanted nothing more than to leave. I forced myself not to run. Every instinct screamed at me to sprint, but I knew running might look suspicious. So I kept a steady pace. Calm, slow, deliberate. I didn't even look back. Behind me, I heard them yelling something. To this day, I have no idea what they said. My heart was pounding so loudly that I barely registered the words. Then, I heard one sentence clearly. One of the men shouted, "Fuck." That scared the shit out of me. Even in that terrifying moment, that sentence stuck with me. Because it suddenly occurred to me that they had been just as startled as I was. I hadn't interrupted them on purpose. I had accidentally walked into their operation. For those first few seconds, they probably didn't know who I was. Maybe they thought I was a police officer. Maybe they thought I was someone sent after them. Maybe they simply panicked. Only later did I realize one detail that might have changed everything. I wasn't dressed normally. I was wearing a full clown costume. Our church program included performances and entertainment for the children. That day I had been assigned to be one of the clowns. So when I turned that corner, I wasn't wearing regular clothes. I had full clown makeup covering my face. I was wearing a bright wig. I had an oversized shirt, baggy pants, huge shoes. a ridiculously long polka dot tie, the whole outfit. Looking back, I honestly wonder if that costume saved my life. Imagine the situation from their perspective. They're conducting what appears to be a drug deal. Suddenly, someone appears around the corner. Instead of an undercover police officer, it's a clown, a full-sized clown. No badge, no threatening posture, no attempt to hide. Just a confused-looking clown saying, "Pardon me." The absurdity of the situation may have completely changed how they reacted. Maybe they realized immediately that I couldn't possibly be law enforcement. Maybe they thought I was too ridiculous to be any kind of threat. Maybe they simply found the whole thing so unexpected that they decided to let me walk away. I'll never know. I've replayed that moment in my head countless times over the years. If I had been dressed normally, would they have assumed I was a witness? Would they have thought I was an undercover officer? Would they have reacted differently? There's no way to answer those questions. I only know how the story ended. I walked away alive. Nothing happened after that. I made it back to the church group without anyone realizing how close I had come to disaster. For a while, I didn't even fully process what had happened. Sometimes your brain protects you by delaying the emotional reaction. It wasn't until later that the reality really hit me. 2 armed men had pointed guns directly at me. And somehow, by staying calm and simply walking away, I had survived. I've told this story a few times over the years, and people usually laugh when I mention the clown costume. I understand why. It sounds like the setup to a joke. But for me, it has never been funny, because I genuinely believe that costume may have been the one thing that convinced those men I wasn't a threat. Sometimes survival doesn't come from bravery. Sometimes it comes from luck. Sometimes it comes from being in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. And sometimes it comes from accidentally walking into one of the most dangerous moments of your life while dressed as a clown. As strange as it sounds, I still believe that's probably what saved me. It remains one of the most surreal experiences I have ever lived through, and every time I think back on it, I can't help wondering how differently that day could have ended if I had been wearing ordinary clothes instead of a bright red nose, oversized tie, and a ridiculous clown wig.